Pints with Jack, Season 3, Episode 43. After Hours with the Tolkien Road. Good morning. Welcome to Pints with Jack, a podcast where two enthusiastic C.S. Lewis amateurs get together, share a beverage, and discuss a work of C.S. Lewis. This season we read Till We Have Faces. However, July is Tolkien Month here on Pints with Jack, so we're discussing all things Tolkien, and today we're talking with John and Greta Carswell from the Tolkien Road podcast. I've been a listener to their podcast for quite some time, and in fact, listeners might recall me mentioning them back in Season 2. Now, as I said before, each of our guests this month are going to be focusing on a different aspect of Tolkien's life and work, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about the Silmarillion. And this is great because this Easter I began reading the Silmarillion for the first time. And while it definitely contains some gorgeous writing, I will already admit that it's not really the easiest of reads. So I'm really looking forward to what John and Greta are going to have to offer to help motivate us to read this great work and to get the most out of it. But first of all, a little bit about my guests and their podcast. The Tolkien Road podcast was launched in early 2015. On the show, co-hosts John and Greta Carswell journey chapter by chapter through The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, The Hobbit, as well as Tolkien's other works, often with the help of a few haikus. John has written several books about Tolkien. He's the author of Tolkien's Overture, an exploration into Middle-earth's creation story and the role of music in Tolkien's tales. And he has also written Tolkien's Requiem, which is a contemplative journey through Tolkien's most personal and pivotal Middle-earth tale, the story of Beren and Luthien. And since I've mentioned that they're lovers of haikus, I thought I would write one for the occasion. John, Greta, David. An unexpected party. 3 is company. John and Greta, welcome to Pints with Jack.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for having us on. Great haiku.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
I only realized it a couple of days ago. It's like, I have to write a haiku to welcome them. This is clearly how this couple communicates. This is clearly their love language.
All the time. Yeah. We go through phases where we do the haiku on the podcast and then we stop doing it. And then people write in, they're like, why aren't you doing the haiku anymore?
And it's funny. It feels like the haiku is kind of a divisive thing. Like people either love it or they hate it. Like there's no middle ground. We've got lots of love letters and lots of hate letters about the haiku. So it's kind of funny.
Well, I loved it.
Good. Well,
awesome.
And that's why I stole it for Season 2 of our podcast.
I think that's great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Imitation is the finest form of flattery. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So today I'm drinking some PG Tips tea. Are you guys drinking anything?
Some high quality H2O for me.
I got some LaCroix. Some peach pear LaCroix.
It's already it's already a little afternoon where we are, so the coffee has already been had for the day. So,
and Greta, on this podcast, we call it La Croix.
Oh,
because we're classy like that.
I like that La Croix.
Well,
that's better. I like that.
We live in the South in Tennessee, so
we usually call it La Croix.
We don't do none of that fancy talk around here.
But David, I want to know, what is PG Tips tea? I've never heard of that.
So it's a black tea, and It is probably one of the most standard teas that you'll get in England. You'll have PG Tips, Tetley, and Yorkshire Gold. Those are the 3 common approved black teas.
Okay,
right.
So PG is the brand.
Yes, but PG Tips is the name.
Got it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have to try that sometime.
Yes. I will say my favorite tea, if I were drinking tea, would be Lady Grey. I love the Lady Grey teas. Lady Grey
is very nice.
Yes.
Now, do you have it with milk? Or do you have it with lemon? Or just plain?
I usually just have a little bit of honey.
Okay.
Usually. I know.
I will allow it. Next time for me.
David's dying inside right now.
Try some lemon.
Some lemon. I've never tried lemon.
Just a little squeeze of lemon.
Fresh lemon.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, if I'm having a hot toddy, I would definitely put lemon in that. But if it's just straight tea, I'll have to try that. So just lemon, no honey or anything.
You can add it if you want to sweeten it a little bit, but I would just suggest just trying it with a little bit of lemon.
A little bit of lemon.
Both Lady Grey and Earl Grey. Both of those work.
Okay, that works. I'll do that. I will do that, and I'll report back.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
And now that we've got the drink of the week covered, let's do the quote of the week. And I figured, since I'm speaking with the guys from the Tolkien Road, that the quote of the week would have to relate to roads somehow. So I chose this section from Mere Christianity. If you are on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. And in that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man.
Brilliant.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Love it.
And in each episode, we toast a Patreon supporter, and today we're toasting Daniel Quintero. So Daniel, since we are talking about roads, may you have the hindsight to know where you've been, the foresight to know where you're going, and the insight to know when you've gone too far. Cheers.
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 Okay, so to kick things off, can you please tell the listeners a little bit more about yourselves?
Sure. This is John speaking.
The masculine voice you're hearing.
So
There's no confusion.
So Greta and I have been married for, I should have done the math before. It's 18 years.
Almost
18 years. Mm-hmm. Yes, this is 2020, so 2002. Mm-hmm. We have 3 kids, and we live in Franklin, Tennessee, which is a kind of a suburban community just south of Nashville. So, what do you want to add?
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, everything that you said. Mm-hmm. Plus, we love Tolkien, and I love to read. I love Lewis.
Yeah. We do love C.S. Lewis. In fact, C.S. Lewis is really my first love when it comes to writers, without a doubt. So, in fact, from a young age, he played a pivotal role with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe played a pivotal role in my becoming kind of self-consciously becoming a Christian, a follower of Christ when I was just a little kid, through the influence of my parents reading that story to me. And so he will always be near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And obviously you love Lewis, but when did you first discover Tolkien?
Well, I first discovered Tolkien probably, I think I was in middle school, so that's probably the early 90s at some point. And I think my dad saw me playing too many video games one summer and was like, "You're going to read a book and do a book report this summer." And so he had me read The Hobbit, and then I did a book report on The Hobbit, I guess. I have no memory of what the book report actually consisted of. And honestly, I did not fall head over heels for Tolkien at that time. I mean, I think I enjoyed reading the book, but I don't really think it grabbed me at that point. It wasn't until the movies came out, the Peter Jackson movies came out in the early 2000s, that all changed. And I remember going to see, I'd heard a lot of people talking about how great Lord of the Rings was. And I'd even heard people saying like it's the greatest novel of the 20th century and these sorts of things. And I was like, wow, okay. And you know, and being a Christian myself, I was intrigued to learn that Tolkien himself was a Christian, and that it was a very, you know, his Christianity was very influential in Lord of the Rings. So then I went to see Fellowship of the Ring in the theaters, and I fell in love. I mean, I just fell in love with this vision, and I had to go and then read Lord of the Rings. So between when Fellowship of the Ring came out and when The Two Towers came out the next year, I had read Lord of the Rings twice, I think.
Wow.
So, and I just fell in love with Tolkien through that experience. So no matter how you feel about the Jackson movies, I have to salute Peter Jackson for giving us the movies he did, because it contributed to me getting to the source material, which changed my life in a big way.
I absolutely love that, because I have a very similar sort of story. I too was prompted by the movies. From time to time, you do come across Tolkien nerds who get very sniffy about the fact that there are movies at all.
Right.
And that's even before they pointed out that Faramir is completely wrong and where's Tom Bombadil? And so no, I'm pleased that somebody else also watched the movies, loved them, and that made them go to the books.
Yeah.
How about you, Greta?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. I was thinking about this, and I can't quite remember when I first discovered Tolkien. I think it must have been through John. I was not a huge reader. Like, I thought reading was kind of lame when I was in high school, and I didn't even read some of the books I was supposed to read for my high school and college degrees. But I think we started dating, and you know, I think we may have gone to see one of the movies together. Or I don't even really know the specifics, but I know that it was probably through him that he just really encouraged me and told me how great the books were and you should read these. And then I know we went to see at least one of the movies together, if not more than that. But my favorite Tolkien memory is the night before our wedding. I could not sleep. I was, like most brides, I was just kind of anxious and, worried about the weather and make sure everything was going to go according to plan or whatever. So I couldn't sleep. And my grandmother was in town. So I had been kicked out of my room and I was sharing a room with my youngest brother, who also couldn't sleep because he was playing a solo that I was going to walk down the aisle to on the trumpet the next morning. And so we both sat up and watched Fellowship of the Ring together on our, I think we had it on a computer or something. I can't remember, but that's how we passed the night before my wedding day, is watching Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah. That is wonderful.
Yeah, so that probably had a big role in sparking my love for Tolkien and his works. So.
And what actually is it about Tolkien that you love about his writing?
Listen to the podcast. No, it's a great question, and I could really go on and on about it, but I'll just try to hit some of the high points. I think the thing I sensed even when I saw the movies and then read the books, read Lord of the Rings, was that there was just this thing, like this depth to the work that I couldn't get to the bottom of, but it was beautiful and it was enchanting and it felt so real. And I just wanted to get into that. I was not Catholic at the time. I didn't really have a good understanding of like sacramental theology and that kind of thing. But now looking back, and for a long time, I've attributed that quality to this sort of sacramental thing, right? That Tolkien imbues his works with. That he's never like on the nose in an allegorical fashion. In fact, he kind of repudiates the idea of writing stories like that. But everything in his works is imbued with deeper meaning and the symbolism, even as he's just telling a story. And they're just so rich. I mean, his stories are so rich. And then on top of all of that, when you read his letters, you read some of his non-Middle-earth works as well, especially a story like Leaf by Niggle. You just realize you catch an even deeper glimpse of the heart of this man, and you love him. I mean, how can you not help but love this man? So I'm just gushing at this point, I know, but that's what I do when we get talking about Tolkien. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think probably the only thing I could add to that I personally love about Tolkien is I love the way he writes. Like, I think it's just like John said, it's rich, yes, but it's just beautiful. I feel like sometimes I'm reading it and I just have to stop and just like take a moment and just let it, just kind of marinate in his words. Because it's just, it was clear that he knew the English language like very, very well. And he knew his history of the English language very well. And the way he puts it all together, it's just beautiful. And not only is it beautiful, but it's just so real. Like, you can just picture like where he is and where he wants to take you. It's truly, it truly transports you to the world that he created.
Another thought that occurs to me is you're talking, Greta, like about his love of language is, I think in a way he's almost Tolkien himself in his own biography is an icon of the most famous myth he created, in the sense that here he is, just this kind of, for lack of a better term, mild-mannered, Oxford Don philologist, a total language nerd from, knows languages that nobody knows, and created his own languages. And what does he do? Nothing but wrote quite possibly the most popular book of the 20th century, and actually two of the most popular books of the 20th century, and created this mythology that has just enchanted millions, if not hundreds of millions, and has affected the lives of so many people in a positive way. And you think about, you kind of liken that to, either Frodo or Bilbo or both, right? And and how their little acts, these kind of mild-mannered little people who didn't seem that important at the time, have changed the lives of so many people, right? So, gushing again,
and all the while wearing snappy.
That's right. That's right.
Smoking a pipe, and he's very imitatable. I feel like, I mean, I know we have a John kind of, being Catholic in the communion of the saints. John says, I believe Tolkien's a saint. And I pray to him. Mm-hmm. And one Christmas, I found someone where you could get like a, little devotion candle, and it had Saint Tolkien on it, all in his, in his snap, I mean, I think he had a pipe, but I don't know that he was wearing a waistcoat, but he looked a little bit more, robed as the saints would be. But he's just had an incredible influence on John's life, and then through John, me. So
I was walking through our house preparing for just preparing for our own podcast episode this week, and reading a little snippet from The Hobbit. And on my Kindle version of The Hobbit, it has the ability to listen to Tolkien reading some of the passages.
Oh, cool.
And I started playing this for Greta, and I was just like, I was just being a total nerd about it. I was like, how, he's just reading, it's just like this old recording of him reading a poem or something like that. And I'm just totally nerding out on it. Like, it's his voice. It's his voice.
He sounds so beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Indeed.
I'll have to send you, someone sent me them a while back, but they were a series of icons, so done in the Byzantine style, but the characters were characters from The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, awesome. No way. That's
so cool.
I gotta say, Gandalf the White looks really good as an icon. Just saying.
I bet he does.
I can dig that.
I can see that. I can totally see that. Yeah.
Awesome.
So let's talk about your podcast and the books. So first of all, I always like asking people who started podcasts, what was it that sent you over the edge to actually sit down in front of a microphone, record something, and put it up on the internet? Because it is mildly terrifying the first time you do that.
Yeah, well, for me, I think it is something that for a long time I had wanted to maybe get into podcasting somehow. I had been listening to podcasts for a few years at that point, and it, it's crazy to think 5 years ago how much smaller podcasting was than it is now, and really it was a series of events that led to me getting into podcasting, because I had finished a master's degree in English literature in the middle of 2014, and I had written my master's thesis on Tolkien, and so I'd written another essay that I decided to turn into my first book, Tolkien's Requiem, and so I'm like, okay, maybe I just need to kind of journey down this road a little bit and see if I can expand and just kind of turn this exploring Tolkien's works things into something, something bigger than just kind of a hobby. And so I was like, I just said, hey, Greta, you want to start a podcast on Tolkien? And we were just take it one step at a time, take it one episode at a time, and have fun with it. And, but really it was just the love of Tolkien and like wanting to be connected with other people who love Tolkien, and wanting to unpack some of the things that I myself was seeing in his works for other people and share those with other people. So yeah, that was where it all began.
And I was, when John came to me with the idea, I was a bit flummoxed. I was like, where is this coming from? I mean, I like the books. The movies are, fun to watch, but a podcast, the thought had never occurred to me. And really, I think, I went into it just like, oh yeah, maybe we'll give this a whirl, and maybe we'll do a few episodes, and then he'll realize that this is just, it was a fun phase, and now we're done. but we kind of got into it, and John realized that I made him look really smart because I didn't know a whole lot.
That was the whole ploy from the beginning. It's like, you'll make me look smart because you know less than I do.
Right. And he was like, well, I can't do this by myself because that will just be boring, and lectures just, people don't really respond to that in the same way they respond to discussion. And
I've since discovered that you can actually do that. Okay. Like you can actually, if you're good at it, but it actually, I think most of the podcasts I like listening to are at least one person in general. Right.
Yeah.
But the thing that there were already some Tolkien podcasts that existed at that time. And the niche that I wanted to go into was, I felt like there was a lot that were like, okay, we're going to look at like half of, The Hobbit, and then we're going to look at the other half of The Hobbit on the next episode. And my thing was, I felt like Tolkien's works were so rich that they deserved a very close read, like a super close read. And so we're like, we're not going to do more than one chapter at a time on this podcast. And even in that, like even in there, like there's some chapters we end up spending 2 or 3 episodes on because there's so much detail and so much to consider. And even then I feel like we didn't do it justice. But the idea is to just, our kind of tagline is a long walk through Middle Earth. So we're just taking the time to stop and smell the flowers in every chapter. And, because that's the kind of world Tolkien created. It's so detailed and rich and wonderful.
Yeah, we have our fair share of rabbit trails too, as you've probably noticed. But I can't help but think that Tolkien would approve of that as well. Yeah. I'm sure they had plenty of rabbit trails in the Inklings meetings. I can only imagine. But
our
seems
podcast
right.
started in a very similar sort of way because Matt and I began a book club for C.S. Lewis, and we're meeting once a month, so you have to do chunks of books at a time. And so we read one book of, Christianity is made up of 4 books, and so we read one book each month. And the discussion lasted usually about an hour and a half, something like that. And at the end of it, I was going, there's so much more I wanted to say. We just skated over that.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Because I was looking at your podcast, and I know you typically go chapter by chapter as well with the works that you cover. Yeah.
We picked it up a little bit with Till We Have Faces to do them 2 chapters at a time. Okay. Because it's really tough with this sort of thing. It's like when you're studying a difficult book of the Bible. In some ways, it helps to go more slowly because you're more careful over the words. You have things very clear in your mind. But at the same time, sometimes it helps to actually pick up the pace a little bit so you get the entire picture and you don't get lost among the weeds. So we made that judgment call for Till We Have Faces, and we might do it again for the fictional works. But yeah, by and large, a nice slow read as well.
Yeah.
And that was going to lead me on to my next question, actually, because what is it that you would say, how has your understanding of Tolkien and his works changed by doing it this way? Because it's not normal. It's not normal to read a book this slowly.
That's true.
Well, one thing I'd say first and foremost is with all the different people that we've gotten to know through this effort over the years, I've met so many. I've realized how what a small fish I am in the pond of knowing stuff about Tolkien, Tolkien knowledge, and I certainly know more than your average Tolkien fan, but there's people out there that they know Tolkien like nobody's business. It's incredible. And so we've met a lot of people who have been studying Tolkien since before we were born, and have been at a college level, teaching courses, and people that know his languages, and it's really, that part of it itself is fascinating. So just the devotion he inspires in so many different ways to his works and the world he created is incredible. I think just going through on this very deliberate, close reading basis too has just allowed us to pick up on a lot of detail that we might have missed too. So yeah, I guess that's what I'd say on that. Yeah. What about you?
Well, as someone who really, like I shared before, hadn't spent much time at all studying Tolkien. I read the books. I'd read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. That's it. So I feel like I've just my knowledge has quadrupled times 10. I mean, like it's, I didn't know that there was a word for that. But I mean, I feel like I've gone from just very kind of surface, kind of common knowledge to, I mean, I've just learned so much through just the different, like, I didn't even know that he had written things other than The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, which I'm a little embarrassed to say, but I mean, like you mentioned Leaf by Nigel, and then we've, of course, reading the Silmarillion, and that's when I felt like I'd really arrived, was after I could say I'd read the Silmarillion. So yeah, I just I've gone from 0 to 60, I guess. Like I've learned a ton, and I still can't pronounce things nearly as well as you can when it comes to the places and people. But yeah, I mean, I would not be where I am today if it weren't for being his co-host, that's for sure, when it comes to Tolkien.
We also started out doing the Silmarillion first on the podcast, which was maybe
bold.
Yeah, well,
it was. That's putting it nicely.
But my thought was, well, it was the one. It comes first chronologically, and of course, we have a little bit of a problem with the shiny object syndrome, so it's hard for us to one of the challenges of doing a chapter by chapter approach is at some point you're like, all right, here we are 20 episodes in, and we've only done like half of the Silmarillion, and I'd really like to get to Lord of the Rings at some point. So we took a break and would do long stretches of Lord of the Rings and then come back to the Silmarillion. Of course, now we've done all the main works of Middle Earth at this point. But the other thing I think doing it that way allowed us to do was really, once we got to Lord of the Rings, just see a lot of the connection between the stories of the first age and the third age, like understand more of the references, the passing references that Tolkien will make to things in Lord of the Rings. And then you're like, oh, that's who Beren and Luthien are. Oh, that's what Thangorodrim is, like, all these sorts of things.
Yeah, it's like when you read the Bible and you know your Old Testament really well, and then you can get like all the references in the New Testament that that are referring back to the Old Testament. That's how I feel like it was after we got through the Silmarillion, and we just started. Our children, unfortunately, are not latched on to Tolkien the way we would have liked them to.
Of course they're not, because their dad's a Tolkien nerd.
They're all about, right now, it's Harry Potter. Like they are they cannot get enough Harry Potter, which is a start, I guess. But so John's been reading Fellowship out loud we're doing a family read aloud of Fellowship, and even just listening, like even though I've read the books twice now, just hearing him read, I'm like, oh, I know that name from this story in the Silmarillion, or the Silmarillion really does like broaden your understanding of just the whole of the whole world that he created and how everything fits together. I think that's been really what I've really appreciated about reading so many more of these of Tolkien stuff, is you just see how it's all interconnected. And he had his the way he worked it all together is just it's just unbelievable.
The analogy with the Old Testament and understanding Jesus is a really good one, because in the course of teaching a class on the Gospels this year for a high school class, I learned a lot about how a lot of the references that Christ will make to himself reference the Old Testament. If you don't have grounding in what like even something like the Son of Man, like, and how that, like, that's not just some random thing he came up with. That was a Old Testament tradition that he's referencing, and it helps illuminate what he's claiming about himself. And so it enriches your understanding of who Jesus is and how he was presenting himself to the world. And so it's the same thing with Lord of the Rings. Like, when you have this knowledge of the first age, it enriches your understanding of the work that we all love, which is Lord of the Rings, and The Hobbit as well. It actually does enrich The Hobbit as well.
It places the story inside a larger, greater story.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's really beautiful.
And speaking of stories and books, John, you wrote 2 books about Tolkien.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about them, please?
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you. So the first book I wrote is called Tolkien's Requiem, concerning Beren and Luthien. And so this was the book that I referred to, that I'd written an essay as part of my master's degree work on this particular story. And so I decided to kind of expand on that and then turn it into my first book. It was just kind of a little like, let's see if I can do this myself, if I can make a book, right? And then actually bring it to market and all those kinds of things. But it's really an exposition of the story of Beren and Luthien, which is chapter 19 of the Silmarillion, and is actually a story that is referenced multiple times in The Lord of the Rings. And it was one of Tolkien's most important stories, one of his most personal stories too. The interesting fact is that if you visit his gravesite in England, then you'll see that on the grave, he and his wife share a gravesite, and on the tombstone it reads Beren and Luthien, right? So Beren for him and Luthien for Edith, his wife. So you can see that this story meant something to him on a personal level as well, but it's also a very important story in the history of Middle-earth. So I really wanted to explore that story, and the thought also was, here it is sitting in chapter 19, but this is like the best part of the Silmarillion, right? And so you have to like wade through all this stuff, and there's other good stuff. There's definitely other good stuff, but that's one of the challenges of the Silmarillion is you have to wade through a lot that just you have no reference point for, and it's kind of Old Testament-y. And then you finally come upon these really great stories like Beren and Luthien, and all of a sudden, by the way, you like Sauron's in the story of Beren and Luthien, you're like, oh, I know Sauron. Finally, somebody I know, right? And in fact, it's like the best example of Sauron being bad, right? You know, like he's not just the shadow; he's an actual actor in the story. And so anyway, I wanted to write this book, and the thought was maybe this will also be a way that if people find it be challenging to just pick up the Silmarillion and start reading it, which a lot of people do, maybe this book can help people like start with the story. And so I tried to connect some of the other stories from the Silmarillion to Beren and Luthien, because it does all connect, and maybe provide a back door for people who have trouble going in through the front door, you know, into the Silmarillion. And then the other book is Tolkien's Overture concerning the music of the Ainur, and this story looks at Ainulindale, which is the first chapter of the Silmarillion, the book that we have as the Silmarillion, and it's the creation story of Middle Earth, and it's basically this. How should I refer to it? I think the term is cosmogonical myth, right? That tells, it's kind of like the first chapter of Genesis, right? It's like, here is how God created the heavens and the earth, right? Here is how God created Middle Earth, right? And just like the first chapter of Genesis has kind of has a very strong poetic feel to it. It turns out that Middle Earth was created through this thing called the music of the Ainur. Literally, Middle Earth is made of music. And I'm a lifelong music lover. And so I was just fascinated by this concept that music, like Middle Earth is like made out of music. Like, whoa, you know? and when I, having journeyed through, Tolkien's Overture was a later book, and having journeyed through so much of his stories in detail, I was seeing all these references to music in so many different places in both the Silmarillion, in The Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings. Music's just all over the place, and the power of music too. So I was like, so really in that book, what I tried to do was I did a close reading and explored Ainulindale, and tried to kind of give a framework for what I saw going on there, and then I looked at a lot of the musical moments throughout the history of Middle Earth, and kind of explored how they might connect to this idea that Middle Earth is made of music. So yeah.
And would you recommend that people should read your book before or after they've read the source text?
I would never tell people to read my stuff before reading Tolkien, or really any other writer or artist that I was trying to like explore. But the whole idea is that if you find it challenging, go and you can go read my book, and maybe it'll help you, right? Maybe it'll help you get an idea and kind of ground yourself for a better reading. I think with Ainulindale, I think people, it's short enough to where most people could probably make it through and then go read my book, even if they don't understand the story itself the first time, and then but I would encourage people always to go and read, Tolkien's own works, because I don't want my own views and those kind of things to be like, I want to let people's own imaginations and understandings be shaped by the text itself rather than me kind of interjecting and being like, let me tell you how to understand this before you read it, right? Unless it's helpful, right?
Yeah.
Unless they need help, and then I'm glad to help.
Yeah, I've definitely read that chapter at least 3 times. When I first read it, it's like, this is beautiful. Not sure if I understood it. I need to read it again.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's that's the Silmarillion for you.
Challenging.
And
Understatement.
we'll talk about Silmarillion specifically in a moment, but just more generally, do you have any general advice for people when they start reading the professor's works as to how to A, understand, and B, get more out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like anything else. You dive in, and if it's The Hobbit is probably a little more palatable for most people. If you're not the kind of person that can dive into something like the Silmarillion, which honestly most aren't, then yeah, pick up The Hobbit, and it's a more approachable, accessible, traditional story. It'll give you some grounding into the background that you need for the Lord of the Rings, so that's nice. And then the Lord of the Rings, it's interesting as we've gone back and read Lord of the Rings with our kids, because we're doing kind of a read aloud of it right now. The Lord of the Rings is actually a little slow to get going, and so that can be challenging. But once it does pick up, it's just so. It's great. And even the slow, I like the slow parts personally. I like all the detail and the exposition. But I would just encourage people to be patient and to persevere. As difficult as that can be, because all of his works are works that, even with The Hobbit, it's not like even The Hobbit is a more difficult children's story than like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to get into. Mm-hmm. Right. But when you stick with his works, the payoff is incredible, right? The payoff is incredible. So, I mean, patience and perseverance, and there's just so many great resources out there now to help. So if you do need help, like, find a podcast like the Tolkien Road, and there's others out there. So, come along and journey with somebody. And we've had many people write to us and tell us like, I finally made it through the Silmarillion thanks to you guys. Thank you so much. And let's face it, it does make reading works like this much more enjoyable when you have somebody to kind of share and to converse with, or even just to listen to a conversation about it. So, and what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. And I think the only other thing I would say is go into them with the right mindset. I wouldn't recommend taking the Silmarillion to the beach. It's just not. It's not a beach read, take your Agatha Christie or, something like that. But yeah, just kind of know what you're in for, and just kind of, sometimes honestly, when I know I have like, a big chunk of reading to do to get ready for a podcast, I gotta like pump myself up. Like, I'll do like some jumping jacks and, talk myself in the mirror and be like, you can do this, you can do this.
I will quit someday, but that day is not today.
Exactly. Yeah. So, just, and if it gets tough, just put it down. You don't want to force it, I guess. And I have found myself with allowing myself much too little time to read a particular assignment for a podcast, and been like, oh, I know I would have enjoyed this so much better, so much more if I had just allowed myself a little bit more time to get through.
Well, and it's different, and you probably can sympathize with this, David. It's different when you're preparing to talk about something on a podcast, to kind of explain a book or something like that to people on a podcast. You feel a different sense. It's not the same as just sitting down with a book and a nice drink, and and you just get to enjoy it all by yourself, or with one other person. Like there's an added level of pressure to like make sure you have it right, and and the things you're going to say are well grounded, and
not just skip over the difficult words or
right.
some of the references. It's a running joke on our podcast that whenever we come across a Greek name until we have faces, I'll pause and I'll say, "So Matt, can you tell the listeners a little bit about Antigone?" just silence. It's like, okay, right. Well, I looked it up, and this is what I turned out.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's more research and all that kind of stuff. So it's, that is the challenge of doing podcasting. But with the books, yeah, I mean, I think overall, I think we both just say like patience and perseverance with Tolkien's works, because the reward, the payoff is worth it.
Yeah. And a pint of your favorite ale
Always
by your
helps.
side always goes a long way.
Absolutely.
Especially if it comes in pints.
That's exactly right.
Okay, then let's talk about the Silmarillion specifically.
Yes.
Can you just give us a little bit of background as to the work and its composition? Because, this is certainly one of the more complex histories, both in content and the history of the text itself.
Absolutely. The Silmarillion was the first of the works of Middle-earth that Tolkien began well before the word Hobbit had even popped into his mind. And forgive me, I won't necessarily have all the exact dates of particular things, even years, but just
it's totally cool. I would blank them out in my brain anyway. It's like when people give directions and they tell me street names. It's just like all I heard was right at the 7-Eleven.
Exactly. Yes.
So Tolkien essentially began writing the Silmarillion when round about his late teens and early 20s. He was born in 1892, so and so early, like 1910, 1911, 1912 was when the first kind of fragments of the stories that make up the Silmarillion started. He started writing these things down, and interestingly, the genesis of them was in his own love of language and the languages he was creating. Right, so he was creating his own languages, and then he was like, these languages need mythology to go along with them. And so he started creating stories based off of these, right? Which just, again, tells you about this guy's genius, like what a unique individual this was, right? Because who does that, right?
Right, I know. I was thinking the same thing. Like, surely, like, most people would create the universe and then be like, oh, maybe a fun language would be good.
Right.
But he did it the other way.
Or maybe skip both and just tell a story like a normal person.
But he was the kind of guy. Yeah, he was the kind of guy. He creates this mythology and like histories, and then he's like, okay, maybe I'll tell a story within the context of this too. And then World War I happens, and he was involved in World War I, like most men of his age who lived in Britain, and so that obviously influenced a lot of the stories as well. But he continued working on these stories. They were just kind of his private little, hobby, that he worked on throughout the 20s and then into the 30s. And then, of course, in 1937, The Hobbit happened. And that, we won't get into the history of The Hobbit itself, but, The Hobbit came along like after he had been working on the Silmarillion for 20 years. And he had some little notes in the original edition of The Hobbit that connected it to these kind of like larger off stories that just very subtle things. But in his mind, he was like, there is some connection to this other stuff I'm working on. I'm just not entirely sure of what it is. But then The Hobbit was a huge success, and he was asked to write a sequel to it, which of course eventually became The Lord of the Rings. But it took him 16 years, maybe not 16 years, but around 15 years basically to complete The Lord of the Rings and see it published. And with The Lord of the Rings, he very deliberately connected it to this larger mythology that he was working on. And his hope the whole time was that he could get both The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, published at the same time, right? Because he was like...
Because they're both such small books.
Right. Yeah. It was like, I wrote the Bible, but my own version of it. Can you please publish this for me? Right. And so Tolkien, has some funny moments in some of his letters that you can find where he talks about like, he kind of realizes at some point that like, yeah, the Silmarillion might never see publication because there's one glaring problem with it. It doesn't have hobbits, and he knew that like hot people loved hobbits, he's just like, but they didn't exist back then, in the First Age, in the stories of the First Age. So of course, the rest is history as far as Lord of the Rings goes. I mean, Lord of the Rings built on the success of The Hobbit and became this thing that just inspired incredible devotion. And throughout the rest of his life, Tolkien continued to work on the stories of the First Age and the Silmarillion and hoped that they would eventually see publication. But unfortunately, he passed away in 1973. I think I have that year right. And they had not seen publication fortunately, his son Christopher came along, and Christopher was Tolkien had 4 children, and Christopher was the child that kind of provided, like, that he spoke about these stories most with. And so Christopher kind of took the mantle of his father and wanted to continue to publish, the things that hadn't been published. And so 4 years later, in 1977, we got the Silmarillion through the effort of Christopher, and with the help of a gentleman named Guy Gavriel Kay, and so that's the Silmarillion we have it now. So it's an interesting question of, like, would this be the Silmarillion we actually would have had if Tolkien himself had seen it published, or how much it's kind of an open-ended question of how much influence Christopher had on editing this book. So,
well, I think if it had been left up to his father, we would have never seen it.
It never would have been good enough, for his father. He was kind of a perfectionist in that way.
Now, Greta, you read this along with the show, so you hadn't read this before you started on the podcast.
Correct. Yes.
So what was your impression as you started going through it for the first time?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was a tough go. Like, it was a really tough go. Again, beautiful writing, absolutely beautiful, but I found myself, I just had a hard time contextualizing all of it, and trying to figure out who the Valar are, and kind of their role, and pronouncing their names, and it was a little I don't know what the right word is, but it was a little ethereal for my taste. It was
ethereal.
Just
you mean ethereal?
I get those words mixed up.
I know.
Okay, ethereal. What did I say?
Erythral.
I don't even know what that is. That's probably not even a word. That's
See,
like
this
a
is what
form
happens
of
when
urethra.
This is what happens when people read Tolkien. They just want to start creating language.
Exactly.
That's right.
That's exactly what
Sub-creation
happened.
at
So
its best.
there-
Never
That's
apologize,
right.
Greta. Never.
Amen.
Amen.
See, you totally harshed my buzz there. Anyway, okay.
I meant what I
so,
said.
it was, so coming to the Silmarillion after having read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, which are much more concrete, actual, like, stories, and this was, it was just a little out there. So it was tough, and to be completely honest, if I didn't know that I had to talk, like, I was going to have to at least sound somewhat intelligent on the podcast, I don't think I would have stuck with it, to be completely honest. I knowing that there was a purpose to my reading other than for my own personal enjoyment, which, to be completely honest, was not there most of the time. I don't think I would have made it through. So it really helped, and knowing that that John had read it before, and I could ask him questions, that was also super helpful. But it was it was beautiful, like I said, but definitely a tough read for sure. You'd get little breaks like Beren and Luthien, or some fun stories that were a little bit more comfortable. But for the most part, it was hard. Yeah. It was kind of like reading the Old Testament. Who wants to sit down and read through Leviticus?
Interesting.
Me.
Really fascinating story, and then like 3 chapters of genealogy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, my fiance and I were actually doing the Bible in a year this year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, Leviticus was fine. It was when we got into Numbers that was like, oh my goodness, make it end.
Right, exactly.
But then you end up with Judges and lots of crazy stories about people being stabbed with swords and losing the hilt because they're so fat, and women nailing guys' heads to the ground. It's like, yeah, that's more like it.
There we go. There we go. Yeah, but you have to get through Numbers to get there. So
that's right.
Well, if you read Leaf by Niggle, Tolkien definitely believed in sanctification through suffering. That's his purgative tale. Maybe he thought, I just need to put a few sections in the Silmarillion just to keep out the riffraff.
That's right. That's right.
It is definitely a weeding out. I feel like it's definitely a book that weeds out the,
You shall not pass unless you read this part first.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I'm very proud of the fact that I've made it through. I will say that, because it's a challenge.
And you can look with affection back on it and see that
Totally.
among the
Yes.
tough parts, there were also some really great parts.
Absolutely. And it totally enriched, my rereading of The Lord of the Rings as well. I just feel like so it came alive to me in a new way after I'd read the Silmarillion, and just seeing how it was all connected was really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, John, can you just give us an overview of the work itself now, so that we can understand what Tolkien was doing? Because, as we've said, it's not just a straight story arc.
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, I'll say a couple of things at the outset. We did one episode of the podcast that's just the Silmarillion in one episode. So that if you like somewhere to start, that's actually maybe a good place to go and just like get the overview in one episode of the podcast. And the other thing I'll say is that I did some videos recently on YouTube that are an intro to the Silmarillion, and they're intended to be kind of a like 5-minute chunks, and they're 8 videos, 5-minute chunks, and they kind of divide the story into a couple of different sections. But it's no small feat. I mean, like to really take the story, because it covers thousands of years of history, and there's no like one main character except for the bad guy who is Melkor, and then all of a sudden has his name changed to Morgoth in the middle of the story. But I'll do my best. So, like I said, it begins Ainulindale. You get the creation story of Middle-earth. Then you have this chapter called Valaquenta, which is a catalog. It's not really a story. It's more of a catalog of these creatures called the Valar. And the Valar are the powers of Middle-earth. They're like these gods, angelic beings that God, like the ultimate God, creates and then sends into this world called Arda to kind of finish making this world. Okay, so Valaquenta deals with that and introduces the main Valar and some other lesser figures, but still like gods, right? Gods and goddesses. And then we actually get into the story of the Silmarillion, which involves the Valar, who are, they're good creatures. They're benevolent creatures, and they kind of rule this world of Arda in a benevolent way, trying to help it grow into what it's supposed to be. And they're also preparing the way for what are called the children of Iluvatar, who we later find out are elves and men, right? So elves are the elder children of Iluvatar, men are the younger children of Iluvatar. So we get the creation of these 2 lamps by the Valar. I mean, when you think of lamps, like giant, like mountain lamps to light this world, because there's no heavenly bodies at this point. There's no stars, there's no sun, there's no moon. Melkor then, who's the bad guy, he's the bad Valar, right? He comes along and he destroys these lamps because that's what Melkor does, right? He's a destroyer. He's a trickster, right? And he's a destroyer, and he can't stand for anybody else to be like happy. That's a very simple way of talking about Melkor, but that's kind of the idea. That's good enough for now. Good working definition. So he destroys these 2 lamps, and the Valar are all sad about it, but they 2 of the female Valar, the 2 of the Valir, Yavanna and Nienna, get together and they concoct to create these 2 trees, which are called the 2 trees of Valinor. Okay, and these 2 trees are different from the lamps and the light they give. It's more of a blended light, but it's still this light that illuminates the world, right? So that's their solution to Melkor destroying the 2 lamps. From there, you have the elves awaken. The elves are summoned to the land of the Valar, which is called Valinor. And not all of the elves make this journey. Only really a kind of a small group make this final journey all the way to Valinor. And in this group in particular, there's a group. One of the 3 groups of elves that make the journey is the Noldor, and the Noldor are kind of the ones who are in main focus as the elves during the Silmarillion. The Noldor, out of the Noldor arises this character Feanor. Feanor is the one who creates the Silmarils, which are these holy jewels, and he creates these jewels to house some of the light of the two trees of Valinor. Okay, so they're the most beautiful things anybody's ever seen, the most beautiful creations that anybody's ever seen. Melkor wants these, and so he conspires with a giant spider called Ungoliant, who is the mother, by the way, of Shelob and probably all the other big spiders in The Hobbit. And he conspires with Ungoliant to destroy the two trees of Valinor and then steal the Silmarils. And they succeed in this. And then the action moves to Beleriand, which is the land that you see in the map of the book, right? When you look at the map that's in the Silmarillion, that's the land is Beleriand. So not until chapter 10 are we actually getting to the land that the map is a part of, or that the map shows.
Wait, you're only in chapter 3?
No, we're in chapter 10 now.
Oh, okay.
Chapter 10.
Okay, I misheard you.
I'm telling you, like I'm skipping over so much, you all. It's like it kind of pains me, and I already feel like I'm saying too much at the same time. But the rest of the story of the Silmarillion involves like the Noldor giving chase to Melkor and trying to get the Silmarils back. If there's one unifying plot, that's really it, right? Like, so the Noldor come back they get exiled because they refuse to stay in Valinor. They get exiled from Valinor. They come to Beleriand, and then they're just kind of constantly at war with Melkor and Melkor's forces, trying to get back the Silmarils and ultimately defeat Melkor. And so, one note: Beleriand does not exist in the Third Age, right? So, but if you look at the easternmost section of the map where it says the Blue Mountains or the Ered Luin, those mountains are the mountains on the western edge of the map and of the map we're all familiar with for Lord of the Rings. So that is a very short, lots left out version of the plot.
You reminded me of how much cool stuff there is in it.
Oh yeah.
You just have to kind of wade through you have to wade through kind of the background and you get to, you have to be committed. But if you'll get there, like there's a lot of really fun stories in there. And then after that, there's a final section, right? But it's not the Silmarillion. It's the
great point. Akalabaith. So, so there is like the book begins before chapter 1 with 2 sections, Ainu Lindale and Valaquenta. Tacked onto the end is Akalabaith, and then of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. Akalabaith is the story of Numenor in the Second Age. So Akalabaith really tells the story of the Second Age and the downfall of Numenor. I probably won't even get into all of what Numenor is and all that sort of thing, but just understand that Akalabaith is really meant to be the story of the Second Age, and so of Sauron's rise to power and of the creation of the Rings of Power, and then of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. It's really interesting. It tells the story of Lord of the Rings from kind of a much longer view and a much higher level view. And we actually do hear about like Frodo and other characters from Lord of the Rings, but it's from this kind of 50,000 foot view of all the events. It's like the godlike view of the whole history of Middle Earth.
The big picture.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
A very big nutshell.
Yes, very big nutshell.
And you've been recently putting out resources to help people work through the Silmarillion. I was so pleased when I started seeing these appear on the internet. It's like he knows.
He's inside your brain.
Can you tell us a little bit more about them and where people can find them?
Sure. So I'm still working on getting them out, but it's an 8-part series, and 8-part video series, and I've really divided up the Silmarillion into chunks that make sense to me in order to help people have a grasp going in. Again, give it a try without me or any other help, right? And see if you can see what you can do. And if you hit the wall, come find these videos. One of the things I wanted to do with these videos too is I wanted to shine a light on some artwork because I have such an appreciation for the incredible people that make like art out of Tolkien stories. I think it's something he had an appreciation for as well, because I have zero visual artistic skill myself, and I just look at some of the things people create of different images from Tolkien stories, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Or like, I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a really interesting way of putting it. So I've used, with the permission of these artists, I've used a lot of their works in these videos to kind of be a visual narration as I'm talking about, kind of giving the synopsis of the various chapters. So you can find those videos on YouTube. Just look for the Tolkien Road podcast on YouTube, and you'll find them there. You can also go to silmguide.com, SILM guide.com, and I have a chapter by chapter text guide to each of these stories I put together years ago. It kind of needs revision, honestly, but I put it together years ago, and so the videos will also be posted there. You can also follow the Tolkien Road on Facebook, and you'll find we're going to have the videos up there as well soon. And I'm really looking to make more of a push into doing some shorter video stuff in the YouTube space, just wherever, but shorter video stuff. So definitely come subscribe to the YouTube channel, and lots to talk about when it comes to Tolkien.
Yeah, I've definitely found it helpful. So I've gone through the first few parts, and I find it. I'm definitely a visual learner. So having images both from the text and now from other artists really helps solidify and keep those things together in my head as I'm moving forward.
Yeah, awesome.
How far are you, David? I know you said you started not too long ago, right?
Yeah, I just did the creation myth and then the Valaquinta. I've read those several times to try and get all of the different names into my head. Because I've got a feeling it's going to be important going forward.
Right. I mean, I remember taking notes when I first started. I mean, a lot of that probably was for the podcast, but I think it did help to just kind of keep it straight in my brain about who is who and their role and
to say some of these names out loud. So Valaquinta is not just if you've read much Russian literature or French literature, they have some amazing names in there. So it's like, oh, it's Monsieur M.
Yes,
it's with the So I learned a while ago, it's like, no, you've got to master the names, and then the story won't be quite so confusing. Because, what happens if you end up with another character in the book whose name also begins with D? I'm then lost.
That's right.
I don't know who's doing what.
Yes.
It's a running joke with my kids as we do the Lord of the Rings read aloud, because I'm very deliberate about pronouncing, Aragorn as Aragorn and kind of having a little roll of the R in there. And so whenever it's Aragorn, son of Arathorn, it's like Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and
kids love to make fun of
and
them.
They just, because here I am just talking to my kind of like normal, like whatever quasi Southern accent, without any sophistication at all. So all of a sudden I'm like, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. So
Isildur.
Right, Isildur.
Yeah, it's quite funny. We burst out laughing now and then.
But if you're gonna read Tolkien stories, then read them right. It's like
my thoughts exactly. The one thing that I insist on whenever I'm reading a story out loud is I have to do voices.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. You need work on your voices.
I know, it's hard.
You tried a little bit with Sauron last night. Saruman. And what is it like Sauron and Saruman? Like, I cannot keep those guys straight. I'm like, wait, who's the main bad guy? I mean, I wish he had made their names just a little more different, but anyway.
It's the same with the female characters. Begin with A. It's like, oh, come on.
Yes, that's so true.
Or at least the A sound, the Eowyn and Arwen.
Eowyn and Arwen and
Right.
Not helpful, sir.
Not helpful. No, not
That's
helpful.
what Tolkien did, though.
But
he loved the names. He loved the words.
He did. And they're all beautiful, for sure. Yeah.
Now, a lot of people have seen the Lord of the Rings movies, and there have been rumors circulating for quite some time, and then of an official announcement that Amazon now had the rights to tell some Tolkien stories. And on your podcast, you've spoken a bit about LTROnPrime. Can you explain that and tell us, what do we know about this so far?
Well, LTROnPrime is just our little joke about the name of the hashtag for, because I think the Twitter handle is LOTR on Prime. So Lord of the Rings on Prime, and that's the hashtag you always see. And so we were just like, well, we'll just refer to this as our friend LTROnPrime. So
It's not as much of a mouthful that way.
It's saying LOTROnPrime.
It personalizes it too.
We
just kind of fun.
We're goofballs and like to do that kind of stuff. But I'm delighted. I'm excited. For me, it's all, especially someone who's doing a podcast on this stuff. It's like it's pretty much all upside, right? I mean, even if it's, I would be shocked if it's like horrible, right? So because A, they invested so much money in it, and B, the budget's going to be so big, so it's at least going to be visually amazing, and they're probably going to try and do the writing really well. They're going to put a lot of effort into it, was what I'm saying. So. And at the end of the day, it's going to give us so much to talk about, on this podcast and in the Tolkien community at large. And it's going to bring people to it that wouldn't have been interested in it before, right? Who maybe were crazy about Lord of the Rings when the movies came out, and The Hobbit when The Hobbit came out, but there hasn't been this kind of big pop culture, defining thing for Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth in a long time. We know so little all we know about it right now is that it's going to focus on the story of Numenor in the Second Age, which is really exciting because all we really have for the history of Numenor is a Calabaith and of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, and some fragments of some other stuff here and there, and references to the history of Numenor and Lord of the Rings. So, and just to give people an understanding, Numenor was the kingdom of men that was granted to those men who helped the elves in the First Age again in their struggle against Morgoth, right? So they were given this special island kingdom that was not quite in Valinor, but it was halfway to Valinor. So it was a happier place, and it was a place of peace. And it's basically the story of the downfall of this land, and Numenor, by the way, Aragorn is a descendant of Numenor, and so like Gondor is a kingdom that has roots in Numenor. So that's how you can kind of connect it to the Lord of the Rings. So I mean, I'm very excited to see what this becomes. We don't know much more about it beyond that. Not even really like who the actors who have been announced, who they're going to be playing. It's got a lot of amazing talent as far as writers attached to it. It's got a big writers room. So we'll see how that all pans out. I mean, people who've written for other shows that we both really like. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. A lot of it.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I'm really like that it's focusing on Numenor. Because, like you said, we have a little bit of Tolkien's writing that focuses on that, but not enough really that we can get upset about different creative interpretations. It's like we've talked a little bit about the Lord of the Rings movies, but because that was focused on an entire book that we already had, it was very easy to nitpick and be like, oh, like the things that,
every detail that's not exactly like the book, you're going to find somebody who's like,
the leaf in this shot is not how Tolkien described it.
It's not how Tolkien described it.
Nope.
The shape is all wrong.
You got it wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. So I like that there's enough to kind of give a good framework. But not so much that there's not room for creative interpretation. Because I'm really bad about that. Like, I'm really bad about hating a movie. Just if it does not follow the book, then I loved the book. Like, forget about it. Yeah. Like, I won't give it the time of day. So I think I'll be able to relax and enjoy the series a little bit more, knowing that I'm not going to be able to nitpick.
My biggest hope and desire for the series is that the writing team will understand that this is not just some book you're adapting, right? These works and these stories, even if they're just kind of a framework of stories right now that we've been given, were the work of one man, and one man who is beloved by millions the world over. And my biggest prayer is that they respect and honor his vision and the philosophical underpinnings he brought to his own work. And if they take the time to do that and to honor that through their own work, then I expect to just love it. If they start trying to kind of do their own, pontificating and, kind of put forward their own pet causes in whatever regard into these stories, which we know that in some places people or writers are want to do these days, then you're going to receive a backlash. They're going to receive a backlash if they do that kind of stuff, right? If they get into, just, I don't know, it could anything. It could be politicizing it. It could be any number of things, just doing these spins on, I'll do my own spin on this, on this story, right? It's like, no, you don't get to do that. Like,
so you're basically hoping that they feel the weight that they should be feeling in trying to be a ghostwriter for Tolkien.
Absolutely. That's
I am
big shoes.
You'll
sure.
find people that think it's just a travesty that anybody is ghostwriting for Tolkien now. I'm all about it. I'm like, I think it's about time. Like, I love these stories, and I think it's possible to do this in the right way. So I'm hopeful, and and I mean, if they're listening to this, I'll just be like, hey, I really believe in you guys, and I'm praying for you guys to get it right, because if you don't get it right, I will
find you. I will hunt you down.
I don't want to send any wrong messages, but it's kind of like, if you don't get it right, I mean, that's going to be like, it just as an artist myself, like that would be a burden to me of like, I really screwed this up, so.
And having, I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly now, Ainulindale. Yeah. Having that in my head and in the creation of Middle-earth, when these melodies start appearing that weren't in the original song but are in harmony with it, I think that's a good model for LTROnPrime. As long as it's in harmony with the rest of the work.
Harmony. Exactly.
Be as creative, subcreate to your heart's content.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Absolutely, absolutely. But and so one other thing I'll note that's in fact very encouraging is, at least last I heard, the Tolkien estate is keeping kind of quality control over this. So the Tolkien estate was the estate established after Tolkien died to continue kind of managing the output of his works, and was run for forever by Christopher Tolkien, who we previously mentioned, who passed away earlier this year. But it's still it's a family estate, right? That's running and managing the legacy of Tolkien's own works. And so even though they're not the ones doing the work to produce this, they have their own methods of ensuring that they kind of get a say on quality control and these things, and that it stays true to it. And last I heard, there was an individual named what's his name? Gotta look at my bookshelf. An individual named Tom Shippey, who is maybe one of the great Tolkien scholars, and he was attached to the project to be like the representative for the Tolkien estate and kind of make sure that that the quality control is there. So, so I'm hopeful that with him on board and the Tolkien estate's influence, that this is, because with Peter Jackson, the Tolkien estate had no say in any of what he did. Now, so he was a little freer to just kind of do what he wanted to do. But with this, there is that we're watching, and if we're not happy about something, we can always, we have strings we can pull. So
wonderful.
Yeah,
yes.
It is wonderful.
So during Tolkien Month, I'm ending every interview with a simple quiz. It's a this/that quiz where I'm going to present two options and you tell me your preferred option. So this is also going to be a little bit like the Newlywed Game, since there are two of you.
Perfect.
Great.
So you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Definitely coffee.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wrong, but I'll carry on. Elves or dwarves?
Ooh. It's tough.
Do we have to say it at the same
time? Are we going to count? On the count of three.
Sure.
1, 2, 3.
Elves.
All right. Woo. Good. I got to tell you, it was last second for me. Like, I was like, because elves, but like dwarves are so awesome.
Dwarves are awesome in their own way, for sure. Yeah.
Early bird or night owl?
We're gonna disagree on this one.
Uh,
Night owl.
I'm definitely more of an early bird. Yeah, early riser. Yeah.
I'm not.
Gandalf or Radagast?
Gandalf.
Yeah.
Call or text?
Text.
Text. Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay,
we're
this-
kind of off on our timing.
Are we supposed to all say it at once? Are we supposed to say it at once?
I don't know.
Are we supposed to do a countdown to say it at once?
We need like our little boards, like they have in the. We need like dry erase boards.
That's right.
Oh well.
All right, we'll do the countdown from now on.
Okay.
Okay, the next one's gonna be an important one to a lot of people. Tom Bombadil, wonderful or wretched?
1, 2, 3. Wonderful. Yes. We love Tom Bombadil.
We love him.
Tom Bombadil is fascinating.
Yeah.
He is like, I understand the naysayers, but it's like you're focusing on the wrong things is the problem with the people who are naysayers about Tom Bombadil. You're like, oh, he sings these silly songs, and it's like, you don't get it. You need to read what Tolkien has to say about Tom Bombadil.
We got to the point in our family read aloud not too long ago with Tom Bombadil, and our kids just loved it. Like they were like, after the scene, like, you know, we kind of moved on, and they, you know, one of our kids was like, "Where's Tom Bombadil? What happened to him? Where is he? Is that Tom speak? No, that's not Tom." You know, they wanted more Tom. Yeah,
Yeah,
No.
Tom Bombadil is fascinating.
he is. Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone. Yeah.
Glad to hear it. Perry, Pippin or Merry?
1, 2, 3.
Pippin.
Yes.
All right. Nice.
Okay.
Pippin's just
Shelob?
got that funnier streak to him, I
A
think.
little
yeah.
bit funnier,
It's a little-
yeah. A little more chill.
carefree,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Shelob or Nazgul?
No.
One is this like scary?
I'm just giving you two choices.
I'm all right. 1, 2, 3. Shelob.
Nazgul.
Oh, I hate spiders. I am like terrified of spiders. So the first time I saw the movie with Shelob, when I saw Return of the King, I knew it was coming because I had read the books, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that's horrifying. And then when I finally saw it, I was just like, whoa.
This shit's funny because Shelob doesn't bother me. I mean, she's gross, but it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I'm just like that. That is like literally like that is the deepest, darkest point of the valley of the shadow of death for me.
I mean, yes. I think what is it for the Nazgul for me is the cry. Like it's just, you know, you can hear them before you see them, and that's just terrifying to me.
Well, the next one's a little lighter. Second breakfast or 11's?
1, 2, 3. Second
11's.
breakfast.
I knew we were going to disagree. Because you're eating your second breakfast even before I've even had my first.
This is
So I usually have my first breakfast
Second
around
breakfast
11.
is more my main breakfast.
It's true. Yes. And 11's is more like my brunch. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Boromir or Faramir?
1, 2, 3.
Faramir.
Yay.
Yeah.
Faramir in the book he's just amazing.
So
Yeah.
good. Yes. Yes. I mean, I like Boromir too, but
Another controversial one now. Balrogs, wings or wingless?
1, 2, 3.
Wings.
Wingless.
Oh, okay, you guys can talk about that among yourselves later.
What's yours on that? What do you have on
I'm 100% wingless.
it? Yeah. I think when you read it in the story, yeah, it's shadow and flame, right?
well, who says he can't have wings of flame?
Rabbit trail.
I
Come
like
back, guys.
wings.
Come back.
See, I'm a Nazgul. You know, Nazgul have. I guess I'm partial to
You're
wings.
giving us like 10 episode ideas. Like we need to just do whole episodes on some of these topics. Man.
You're welcome.
That's good. It's fun.
Well, this is a lighter one now. Bagels or croissant?
Oh.
1, 2, 3.
Bagels.
Very
or
American.
bagels. Maybe
Wrong.
we'd say bagels.
Not American.
I know, wrong.
What's the bagel?
I think the problem, David,
yeah.
is that it's hard to get really good croissants here in America.
That is true. That
'Cause
is
when
an
I was-
acceptable excuse.
Thank you. Yes, because when I visited France after college, I mean, I lived on croissants because I mean, why wouldn't you? Like all of Europe, I feel like I had my fair share of croissants, but here in America, they just feel so. They're just imitations of the real thing.
Oh wait,
we don't have a good bakery.
Are we talking
nearby,
about? Are we talking about crescents?
Pillsbury crescent rolls?
We're talking about crescent rolls.
Okay, we're entering the home stretch now. The
Okay.
movies or the book?
Oh,
The book. Yeah.
yes.
Just checking. Okay, Arwen or Eowyn?
Are we counting?
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Eowyn.
It was tough. Like I mean, I like Arwen, but I think Eowyn she's such a great character. Like,
I just love her strength. I think like she is like, you know, I mean, not that Arwen's not strong in her own way, but I just love that princess warrior thing that she's got going on.
I will say I was
Eowyn's got
tempted to go
going
with
on.
Arwen because Liv Tyler portrays her, and you know, and I've always thought Liv
Have
Tyler
You've
was
always been
really
an
attractive.
Aerosmith fan. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best way of putting it right there.
Yes.
Okay, 3 left. Rivendell or Lothlorien?
1, 2, 3.
Rivendell.
Oh yeah, Rivendell.
choice.
Wish I could live at Rivendell. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Me too.
Gollum or Jar Jar Binks?
1.
I don't know who
2.
Jar Jar Binks is.
Oh, that is the correct answer. Oh my goodness, you just win right now.
Do you know at least where it's
My
from?
kids talk about. He must be from Star Wars,
Yeah, Star
right?
Wars, yeah.
Because our kids talk about him all the time. So
He is from
Goll-
the
yeah.
non-canonical movies.
uncanonical.
Gollum 100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
for sure.
Gollum is another just like, what an amazing character. What an amazing character.
Yeah. Really. Yes. So yeah.
Final question. Tolkien or Lewis?
1, 2, 3. Tolkien.
Lewis. Oh.
Yay!
You're fired.
Where's we can't fire me. I quit.
Greta, you can
No.
come on my podcast anytime.
Okay. I would love to. I'm actually. You have me like as soon as I finish the book I'm reading right now. I'm going back to Till We Have Faces because I need to reread it, and I'm going to listen to your podcast while I do it.
Yeah.
Because I need my handheld.
No, I mean, for me, honestly, you know, I told you before that Lewis is my first love, and it will always hold a special place in my heart. And you know, it's I do a podcast about Tolkien, so he has pride of place, but Lewis is an incredibly close second. And I kind of the thing that's so wonderful about the two of them is their deep friendship and what they meant to each other over the course of their lives.
Yeah.
So.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, I read Lewis before I picked up Tolkien. I mean, I had read a lot of Lewis before.
And on that note, David, you need to come on our podcast soon, and we need to talk about Mythopoeia with you. So
Deal.
we're gonna do it here
that would
soon.
be awesome.
So
Yeah, something to look
we need
forward
to do more. We just need to do more interviews on our podcast. We've done some.
I
We need to do more.
We do.
You've
I feel like we
re-inspired
talk
me. This has
about
been
it
so
all the
much fun.
time, but yeah, we need to do it.
Yeah.
Not
I just
talk
find
about
that
it.
they're a wonderful way of talking to people that I want to talk to anyway, but it would just be awkward if I just said, hey, do you want to talk to me for an hour and I'll record it?
Exactly.
Totally. Yeah. In fact, not too long ago, we had one of our listeners reach out about playing Lord of the Rings Trivial Pursuit over Zoom with
yes.
with their family, and so we
Yeah.
did that a couple weeks ago, and that was so fun. I mean, it was
a lot
really
of fun.
really fun. You know, I kind of thought this is going to be, but I mean, it was great. It was really
If
great.
we have to go through a pandemic together as a society, we live in an incredible time to do it, to be able to be connected with just people from all over the world that share similar interests and things, and you know, just make it so easy just to hop on something like this and do it. It's a real blessing.
It really is. It is. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, David. This has been great.
Well, thank you for coming
Yeah.
on the show. To wrap
Yeah.
up, can you just tell listeners where they can go and find out more about you and listen to your podcast?
Sure. So the main base is TolkienRoad.com, and we are on Facebook under Tolkien Road Podcast. And I also mentioned the YouTube channel for Tolkien Road Podcast, which is beginning to grow and take on a life of its own. And then the books are Tolkien'sOverture.com and Tolkien'sRequiem.com.
Wonderful. And I'll put links to all of those in the show notes. And to begin wrapping up, I want to thank our guests again and our Patreon supporters, particularly our top tier supporters of John, Kate, and Rowdy. And I would like to close with a haiku.
Very appropriate.
Tolkien and Lewis, lovers of myth and legend, a great fellowship.
Yeah,
Amen.
You have a knack for these haikus, David. This is, I mean,
It
well
was
done.
season 2, training and listening to you guys for years beforehand.
We need to get back on it, I think, with our haiku.
I think we do. We
Yeah.
kind of dropped the ball. Well, I think we were doing some things there for a while that didn't very well lend themselves to haiku.
Everything lends itself to haiku, though. David's reminded us of that.
That's true. That's true. We just got to think outside the box.
I
Yeah.
completely agree. In fact, my suggestion is next time one of you has a birthday and you have friends over, say no gifts, or you can say gifts as well if you want this. But I had a friend said, okay, no gifts, but you all have to write me a haiku and read it at dinner.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Oh.
That's really fantastic.
That might be a plan for the kids and Mother's Day for you tomorrow.
There we go.
You know what?
Wonderful.
You're brilliant.
I would
Kids,
get on board with
If
that.
you ever listen to this years later, you are welcome.
See, when you bring Tolkien and Lewis and even Tolkien and Lewis fans together, you get incredible ideas.
And
Great
your
stuff.
children have jobs to do.
That's right.
Yeah, that's exactly
Amen.
right. But it's a fun job,
That's right.
so it'll be good. Yeah.
We just have to convince them of that.
Yeah, just
So.
convince them that no, this is not English homework. This is a fun project.
Listeners, please come back next week when I'll be speaking to Caitlin from Tea with Tolkien, and we'll be talking about Hobbit spirituality. And then we'll be going further up.
And further in.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.